The cameras rolled. The lights were blinding. Millions were watching. It was the most anticipated global debate of the year, broadcast live from Geneva. The studio buzzed with tension. On the left, U.S. President Donald Trump adjusted his red tie, smirking. On the right, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, calm, silent, his military uniform ironed to perfection. People didn't expect this. The topic was Africa's independence, economic, political, and moral. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't just a debate. It was a battle between two worlds, two visions of power. When the moderator asked Traoré a simple question, "What does Africa truly need?" he opened his mouth to speak. But he barely got out 3 words before Trump slammed his hand on the table and stood up. "Sit down, you fool," Trump shouted. The room froze. The moderator's mouth dropped. A reporter gasped. The camera operator almost dropped his rig. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just sat there, silent. The kind of silence that makes people hold their breath. Then slowly, he turned his head and locked eyes with Trump. The world waited. Something was about to happen. Something big. Phones started vibrating. News stations were scrambling. Social media feeds began to light up. Trump explodes on Traoré Live. But inside that studio, dead silence. No one dared to speak. Not the moderator, not the panel, not even the security guards. Trump stood tall, arms crossed, looking smug. It was the kind of moment he lived for. Public dominance, a roar in the lion's den. But Traoré didn't rise. He didn't match the energy. He did something worse. He smiled. Not a smirk, not sarcasm. A quiet, knowing smile. Then, with a calm voice and a straight back, he asked one question. "Do you know what it means to silence a man who's speaking for millions?" The room shifted. Even Trump blinked. Traoré reached under the desk and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Its leather edges were frayed. Its cover had been scratched by time. It looked old, sacred. "This," he said, holding it up, "is my father's journal. He died when I was 13. He was a miner, working under one of your country's corporations." The audience leaned in. "I've carried his words with me since that day." A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. The silence was no longer Trump's. It belonged to Traoré. Traoré placed the notebook on the table gently. His fingers trembled, but not from fear, from memory. He flipped through the pages until he found one marked with a red thread. Then he read, "They pay us just enough to survive, not to live. They take our gold, but leave our homes broken. Still, I work, because I believe someday my son will rise, and he will speak louder than they ever allowed me to." Trump shifted in his seat. The smugness in his face melted into confusion. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were feeling, absorbing. Traoré continued, "I watched my father collapse in that mine. No ambulance came, just silence. That silence has followed me since." He paused. His voice cracked just slightly. "I carry that silence with pride, Mr. Trump, but I won't sit down. Not today. Not when that silence now has a voice." Someone in the back began to clap, but stopped, unsure. Traoré looked directly into the camera. "To every child who lost a father in silence, I'm speaking now." The moderator's hands shook. The control room cut to close-up. The debate had changed. This was no longer politics. It was personal. It was human. In homes across the world, people leaned in closer to their screens. The clip had already hit Twitter. TikTok was exploding. In Lagos, a young girl paused her homework. In Paris, a taxi driver turned up the volume. In Ouagadougou, an old woman clutched her scarf with tears in her eyes. The world had seen many debates, but none like this, and Traoré still hadn't raised his voice. Trump adjusted his microphone. "So now you're playing the victim?" he scoffed. "This isn't about feelings. It's about business." Traoré didn't respond immediately. He placed his palm gently on the notebook. Then he spoke softly. "Business?" He reached into his pocket again. This time he held up a photo, a small creased image of a boy no older than 8, barefoot, carrying a bucket twice his size. "My brother, Adama," he said. "He died digging holes for foreign mining contracts." Trump blinked. He was promised education. He got a shovel. People watching began crying. Some covered their mouths. Some began recording their reactions. "But you're right," Traoré said. "Let's talk business. Let's talk about how many children had to bleed, so your corporations could smile." This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Traoré held the photo a little longer. His hand trembled now, not with fear, but with sorrow. "My brother never learned to write his name," he said quietly. "But he knew how to find gold. He knew how to stay quiet when the foreign supervisor passed by. He knew not to cry when his fingers bled." Trump stared at the floor. The moderator had lost control of the moment. "I promised him, at his grave, that one day, the world would hear his name." Traoré raised the photo again. "This is Adama." The screen behind him suddenly flashed. Images of children in muddy mines, black lungs, tired eyes, silent suffering. The control room had pulled up archived footage, without anyone asking. Some in the audience had started crying. And then, Traoré reached under the desk again. He slowly pulled out a small wooden shovel, cracked, worn, still dusted with red earth. He laid it beside his notebook. Trump leaned back. This was the shovel they gave him, not a pencil, not a book. A tool to dig his own death. A woman in the audience burst into sobs. Traoré's voice dropped even lower. "So, Mr. Trump, before you call me a fool, tell me, who made this business?" Traoré looked into the camera. His eyes didn't move from the lens. He wasn't just speaking to Trump anymore. He was speaking to the world. To the children digging under the sun right now, barefoot and hungry. To the mothers washing the blood from their sons' shirts. To the fathers forced to stay silent so they can feed their families. "I haven't forgotten you." He paused. Then he whispered something almost no one expected. "I'm still that little boy too." That sentence broke something in people. In studios around the world, anchors fell silent. In classrooms, teachers turned off the lesson and let the students watch. In villages, elders gathered everyone around a single TV screen. A whisper had done what shouting never could. Trump tried to speak, but couldn't. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Traoré sat tall. "I didn't come here to win an argument," he said. "I came here to return a voice that was stolen." The moderator, clearly shaken, tried to move to the next question. But no one was listening anymore. The world had turned to Captain Traoré, and they didn't want him to stop. Trump tried to gather himself. He cleared his throat and forced a laugh. "All right," he said. "That was dramatic. But it doesn't change facts. Africa needs investment, not emotions. We bring the money. You bring the resources. It's fair." Traoré didn't blink. "You call that fair?" Trump leaned forward. "I call it the world we live in." The moderator hesitated, then finally asked Traoré, "Captain, do you believe America owes Africa anything?" Traoré paused. He reached into his coat pocket again, this time holding a faded paper, folded neatly. His thumb ran gently over the crease. "This is a letter," he said, "written by my grandfather in 1961. He wrote it after American companies took over his village's farmland. He begged them to stop spraying poison over the crops. His cows were dying. Children were getting sick. He unfolded it with care. He never got a reply. He died 2 months later." The The studio went quiet again. Traoré laid the letter on the desk beside the shovel and the notebook. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here to return everything they left us with. Pain, silence, and truth. Traoré turned to the moderator. You asked if America owes us anything, he said. Let me show you what they left behind. He looked directly into the camera. The screen behind him flickered. A video began to play. It showed a village in Burkina Faso, dry land, broken water pipes, children coughing in the dust. The camera zoomed into a rusted sign that read, Property of Liberty, Minerals Inc. This was my grandfather's village, Traoré said. He pointed at a tree in the background. He was buried under that tree. There is no gravestone, just a rock. Trump shifted uncomfortably. Traoré turned to him slowly. You said Africa needs investment, but this is what we got. Empty promises, poisoned wells, and a story no one believed. Someone in the front row began to sob. Traoré leaned forward. We were told to be patient. That change would come, that help would arrive, that one day someone would care. He looked into the lens again. I've waited my whole life, and now millions are watching. So let me be clear, this is not just a debate, this is history trying to heal itself, and it hurts. Even Trump couldn't look away now. The screen behind Traoré went black. He stood silent for a moment, then he whispered, There was a night I almost gave up. The audience leaned in. Years ago, I received a call from my cousin. He was working in a cobalt mine, owned by a Western company. He sounded weak. I asked what was wrong. Traoré paused, his hands tightened. He said, Ibrahim, my lungs are burning. They told me it's just dust, but I'm coughing blood. The audience gasped softly. I tried to get him help. I called the company, no answer. I called the health post. They had no medicine. By the time I arrived 2 days later, he was gone. Traoré's voice cracked slightly. He was only 24. Trump stared at the desk, unmoving. I stood over his body and promised him the world would one day listen, that they would finally see the cost of silence. He slowly looked up at the crowd. I'm not here because I want power. I'm here because I carry graves on my back, and I can't keep burying names without telling their stories. The room was filled with tears now, but Traoré wasn't done. He had so much more to say. Just as Traoré prepared to speak again, something strange happened. His microphone cut out. A sharp pop, then silence. The audience looked around, confused. The moderator tapped his earpiece. Control, we're losing Traoré's audio. Trump smirked and leaned into his mic. Looks like even the universe knows when to shut you up. Some laughed, nervously. But Traoré didn't panic. He stood slowly. Calm. Controlled. He didn't need a mic. He raised his voice, not with anger, but with clarity. If my mic fails, I'll use my voice. If my voice fails, I'll use my story. If my story is blocked, then I'll stand in silence. And the silence will speak louder than your power. The studio erupted in applause. Even some American journalists clapped without realizing it. The producers scrambled to restore his mic. The camera zoomed in. Trump stared at him. This time, no jokes. Because even without a microphone, Traoré was being heard. And the world wasn't just listening anymore. It was believing. The mic came back on. But Traoré didn't sit down. He took a deep breath and unpinned something from his chest. A tiny rusted metal. Old. Worn. Almost invisible against his uniform. This, he said, holding it up, belonged to my uncle. He fought in World War II, for France. A Burkina man who gave his life for a flag that was never his. The room went quiet again. He was promised a home, a pension, a burial. Traoré paused. They buried him in a ditch. Some audience members covered their mouths. I wear this medal not because it was given with honor, but because it was buried with lies. And I wear it so the world never forgets the men you used and discarded." Trump shifted in his seat. His lips tightened. He looked visibly uncomfortable. Traoré looked right at him. "I didn't come here to fight you, Mr. Trump. I came to fight the silence you helped create." He pinned the medal back on his chest. And just like that, a generation's pain, one long buried, was sitting right in the spotlight, glowing under the studio lights. Traoré sat back down, picked up his father's journal, and turned to another page. He read softly. "They say we are poor, but we are not. We are rich in patience, rich in pride, rich in the soil beneath our feet. They only take because we do not speak. But one day our sons will speak with fire in their hearts." He closed the book. Trump crossed his arms. "This is all emotional storytelling. But you haven't answered the question. What does Africa need?" Traoré turned to him. "We need what your country takes for granted," he said. "Respect, justice, a fair voice at the table, and to live without being treated like a resource to exploit." Trump leaned forward. "That's not an answer. That's a complaint." Traoré paused. His face softened. Then he asked quietly, "If your child were born into a system that treated them like a tool, not a human, would you still call it business?" Trump opened his mouth, but again, no words came. The moderator was speechless. Millions watched in silence, and deep in their hearts, many felt it. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a deep wound finally being seen. Traoré gently placed his father's journal back on the table. Then he held up a crumpled piece of paper. "This letter," he said, "was written by a 12-year-old boy named Nabil. He lives in a refugee camp near the border of Mali. He sent it to me last month." He unfolded it with care and began to read. "Dear Captain Traoré, we watch you from our tent when the power is on. My little sister says you are a real hero. My mother cries when you speak. She says maybe one day someone will hear our pain. I want to be like you. But here we don't have pencils, only sticks. Can you help us?" Traoré lowered the letter slowly. He wrote this while sitting on the dirt floor, beside a bucket of rainwater his family drinks from. He looked at Trump. "Would you like to write him back?" Trump stared, frozen. Traoré turned to the audience. "I did write back. I sent books. I sent food. But what he truly needs is a world that doesn't create children like him and then ignore them." Tears now ran freely through the audience and across the world. Traoré's voice softened. "I remember a woman I met in Bobo Dioulasso. She was selling tomatoes in the open market." He took a breath, eyes misty. She looked tired. Her hands were shaking. I asked if she needed help, thinking she might be ill. He looked at the moderator. She laughed and said, "Captain, I'm not sick. I just haven't slept since my husband died in a gold pit. Now I work all day to feed 5 children." The audience fell into a still silence. Traoré continued. "I asked her what she wanted most." He closed his eyes as he repeated her words. "I want to stop being strong. I want to rest. Just one day." Traoré opened his eyes. "That broke me, because we have built a world where women like her are told to carry everyone's pain and never lay it down." He turned back to Trump. "You say Africa needs investment, but we need rest. We need healing. We need the weight to be shared, for once." The moderator looked down. Trump said nothing, and for a second, just a second, the room felt the weight of a mother's silence. The air in the studio had changed. It felt heavier, like everyone was suddenly breathing in history. A history that was never taught in schools. A history that had names, and faces, and families. Traoré reached into his jacket and pulled out a tiny jar. Inside was a handful of red dust. "This," he said, "is soil from my hometown, where we once grew food, where now only open minds remain." He unscrewed the lid and let the dust sprinkle gently onto the table. "This is what's left of our farms," he said. "This is what remains after contracts are signed in quiet rooms, far away from our people." He pressed his hand into the dust, slowly, reverently. "This is the ground I knelt on to bury my brother, my cousin, my uncle." No one made a sound. "And still," he whispered, "you tell me to sit down." He looked up, eyes glowing. "I won't sit. I won't stop. Not while the earth under our feet is being sold without our voices." And in that moment, everyone watching, no matter where they were, felt the dirt on their hands and the weight of what it meant. Traoré looked down at the red dust on the table, letting it rest between his fingers. Then he said something no one expected. "There was a day I couldn't speak." He looked straight into the camera. "I was 17. My school had just been shut down because the government couldn't pay the teachers. I went home and found my mother crying over a broken stove. We had no food." His voice trembled, just slightly. "She told me not to worry, that God would provide. And then she fainted from hunger." A collective gasp spread through the studio. "I carried her to a clinic, but they told me to wait. They were treating foreigners first. When she finally got a bed, she whispered to me, 'You will change this one day, even if your voice shakes.'" He closed his eyes. "That was the first time I felt what powerlessness tastes like. That dry, bitter feeling in your throat when you want to scream. But all that comes out is silence." He opened his eyes again. "And today I'm here, not screaming, just finally speaking." The camera zoomed in, and across the world, millions began to cry with him. A single tear ran down Traoré's cheek. He didn't wipe it, he let it fall, because some tears carry stories too heavy for words. Trump sat frozen, his earlier fire completely gone. The man who once commanded attention with force now looked unsure, quiet. The moderator, voice cracking, whispered, "Captain, why didn't you share this before?" Traoré smiled sadly. "Because no one listens until the room is shaking." He looked around the studio. "You invite us to your debates, but you rarely hear our truths. You want data, not diaries, charts, not children's voices. Today I chose to bring both." He lifted the photo of Adama again, his brother, then the medal of his uncle, then the notebook, then the letter from the refugee camp, and finally, the soil. "This is Africa," he said. "Not just borders, not just resources, but people, history, hurt, and hope." He paused, voice soft as wind. "And today, this hope speaks." The camera cut to the audience. Many were openly weeping. A woman whispered, "I had no idea." Traoré sat back down slowly, and still, Trump said nothing. Because what do you say when the truth is louder than you? The debate timer had run out. The moderators knew it. The control room knew it. But no one dared cut Traoré off. Not now. Not when silence itself was screaming. Traoré looked around the room. "You see, we were taught to be polite, to stay quiet, even when our homes were being emptied." He leaned in. "But silence is expensive. It costs lives." He turned to Trump again. "I don't hate you. I don't even blame you entirely. But when you called me a fool, you reminded every young African watching that our dignity still feels negotiable." Trump's face reddened, but he remained seated. Traoré continued, "I'm not a fool. I am a survivor, a soldier, a son, and I carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. If that makes me a fool, then so be it." The room was still. Even the cameras didn't move. "I didn't come here to fight," Traoré finished.
I came here to finally be heard. And for the first time that night, Trump lowered his eyes. Because when truth speaks with tears, even power bows its head.
Traoré took a sip of water. His hands were steady, but his voice cracked for the first time. "Last year I buried a boy who looked exactly like my son," he said. The audience leaned in. "He died under a collapsed gold tunnel. He was 14. When I asked the company responsible, they said the mine wasn't even supposed to be active. They called it a misunderstanding." Traoré's lips trembled. His name was Malik. He wanted to be a teacher. He never got past 3rd grade. He reached into a small envelope and pulled out a drawing, simple lines drawn in pencil. A boy standing beside a chalkboard, smiling. This was the last thing Malik ever drew. He turned the paper to the camera. People across the world paused their scrolling. A sketch had just stopped a generation in its tracks. Traoré wiped his eyes. He never knew what a classroom felt like, but in his mind, he was already giving lessons. He looked around. "I carry his dream now, and I don't take that lightly." The studio was dead silent again, because now, this wasn't just Traoré's voice. It was the voice of children buried before they were ever heard. A soft cough came from the corner of the stage. It was the interpreter, an older French-African woman wearing a headset. She'd been translating every word Traoré said for the global feed. But now, she was crying. Her voice cracked through the earpiece as she tried to keep translating. Traoré noticed. He nodded at her with gentle respect. Then he turned to the audience. "You see, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be real enough to reach someone's heart." Trump sat in silence. His fingers tapped the table nervously. Traoré continued. "Mr. Trump, you've built towers, owned airlines, and held the world's highest office. But can you tell me one thing? Do you remember the name of a boy you helped?" Trump didn't speak. "Because I remember every child I couldn't save, every mother who buried a son, every letter I couldn't answer." The interpreter wiped her face, but kept going. Across the world, translators in dozens of languages were struggling to hold back tears. This was no longer a debate. This was the sound of the world beginning to listen. And for once, it wasn't to the loudest man in the room. The moderator cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Captain, if you could leave this room with one thing, what would it be?" Traoré didn't rush. He looked down at the table. His father's journal, his uncle's medal, Adama's photo, Malik's drawing, the letter from Nabil, the soil from home. Then he looked into the camera, calm but fierce. "I want this moment to live longer than me." He paused. "I want one African child to watch this debate and whisper, 'I matter.' Just once. That's enough." He turned to Trump. "I know you came here to debate politics. I came to make history, not for applause, but for accountability." Then he looked at the audience. "You may forget my name, but remember the children, the minds, the dust, the silence." The camera cut to the audience. A young girl in the front row was holding her mother's hand, both crying. That image would go viral within minutes. And in that 1 second, the whole world seemed to agree. This was no longer a debate. It was a resurrection of dignity. As Traoré finished speaking, the room sat in stunned silence. Then, something remarkable happened. From the back of the audience, a small voice whispered, "I matter." The cameras caught it. A young African girl, barely 10, repeating Traoré's words with her hand over her heart. "I matter," she whispered again, louder this time. People turned. The moderator dropped his pen. Even Trump glanced her way. The audience, slowly and quietly, began to stand. One by one. No clapping, no cheers, just silence and tears, as if they finally understood. The girl took a few steps forward and stood at the edge of the stage. Traoré saw her, and gently, he knelt. Without saying a word, he opened his arms, and she walked into them. The camera zoomed in. That frame, Traoré kneeling, the child hugging him, dust still on his hands, would break the internet in minutes. People didn't just watch it, they felt it. And for the first time in the entire debate, Trump looked small. Because real power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from being trusted by the ones the world forgets. Backstage, Traoré's phone buzzed. A text from his mother in Burkina Faso. "I'm watching. Your father would be proud." He smiled, then swallowed hard. He stood again and turned back to the camera. "Before I came here, I visited the mountains where my father was buried. I took a stone from his grave. It's with me now." He reached into his pocket and placed a flat, dusty stone next to the others on the table. "This is all we had. Not gold, not oil, just earth. But we were proud of it. We protected it. We farmed it with love." He looked into the lens. "And you turned it into money." Trump shifted again. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm just here to say, we've counted the cost. And now, we are speaking, not to beg, but to remember." The camera cut to a feed from across the world. Crowds gathered in African towns, watching on rooftops, in classrooms, at markets. Many were holding stones in their hands. The whole continent was listening, and the world was watching something new being born. Trump cleared his throat. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in the entire debate, he looked uncertain. He leaned toward the microphone. I didn't know it was this deep," he said. His voice was quieter now. "I thought this was just about trade, business, resources." Traoré gently nodded. "It was never just about that." He stood one final time. He didn't raise his voice, but his words shook the room. "We are not asking for pity. We are not here for permission. We are here for dignity." Then he paused. "And after today, the world cannot say it didn't hear us." The child still stood beside him, silent, watching. Traoré took her hand. Together they walked off stage. No music, no cheers, just silence. But it was a different silence, one filled with respect, awakening, and tears, because something had changed, not just in the room, but everywhere. Traoré stood in silence for a moment, his eyes scanning the audience. Then he spoke softly, almost like a prayer. "I am a soldier, not because I wanted to fight, but because I wanted peace. My uniform carries stories of hope and sacrifice, stories often ignored." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter, worn at the edges. This letter was from a mother who lost her son in a battle no one wanted to fight openly. She wrote to thank me, not because I won, but because I dared to speak. His voice cracked slightly as he read, "Thank you for giving my son a voice. Even in silence, he fights with you." The studio was silent, but the world outside felt the weight. Traoré lowered the letter and looked at Trump. "The real battle is not on battlefields, but in the hearts of those who dare to care." Trump swallowed hard. The fire in his eyes dimmed. This was not the man he had expected. Traoré's voice grew stronger. "In the streets of Ouagadougou, I met children who dream of classrooms, but only find dust. They wait. They hope." He paused, eyes glistening. "One little boy told me, 'I will study so I can make my country proud.' But when his school closed, he cried, because pride without hope is just pain." He turned to the camera, his words clear and simple. "These children are not just statistics. They are our future, our promise." He looked directly at Trump. "What will you do for them?" For the first time, Trump was silent. Because the question wasn't about power or politics anymore. It was about humanity. The studio held its breath. Traoré's final words echoed. I may be told to sit down, but I will always stand for those who cannot. He looked squarely at Trump. Because when a people are silenced, their courage becomes the loudest voice in the world. The room was still. No applause, no shouting. Just raw, pure respect. And in that silence, Trump lowered his gaze. The debate was over, but a new conversation had begun. Millions around the world watched the clip go viral. Because what Traoré said wasn't just words. It was a truth that shook the world. Traoré's eyes scanned the room one last time. The silence you heard earlier, that's the weight of the world finally catching up. He took a deep breath. For decades, voices like mine were drowned out by noise, by power, by money, by pride. His hand trembled just a little as he reached for a small photo on the table, a black and white picture of children smiling, full of hope. These children remind me why I speak, why I fight. He looked straight at Trump. When you told me to sit down, you didn't just silence me. He paused. You tried to silence every child who dreams, every mother who prays, every soul that hopes. The room was still. Then he whispered, but hope does not sit. Outside the studio, millions watched. The clip exploded on social media. March "Sit Down You Fool" trended worldwide. People shared stories, tears, and prayers. A wave of support flooded in. From African villages to European cities, from classrooms to quiet homes. Traoré's words had become a rallying cry. Not just for justice, for dignity, for the right to be heard. Back inside the studio, Trump finally spoke. Not to insult, not to fight, but to say quietly, you changed this debate. The world had changed with him. Traoré stood. This is not the end. It is the beginning. He looked into the camera, eyes full of fire and softness. To every viewer watching now, don't let this moment pass. Like, comment, share. Let your voice join the chorus. He smiled, gentle but firm. Because together we are stronger. The screen faded to black, and millions felt something new. Hope. If this story moved you, if it made you feel even a little deeper, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your voice matters. Share your thoughts, your tears, your hopes. Let's keep this conversation alive, because real change starts when we all stand together.